Hi there, people. Today, we're going over the top 10 episodes of the new Outer Limits. Now, last year, I did a list of the top 10 classic top 7 classic Outer Limits episodes. So this year, we're going over the top 10 new Outer Limits episodes. You might wonder what new Outer Limits is. You may never have even heard of it, but there's a new Outer Limits. Well, not new, it's from the 90s, but it's fantastic. I don't know how more people don't know or talk about new Outer Limits, because whenever anyone says Outer Limits, they're always talking about the classic 1960s series, but there's a revival. It's from like 95, 96 to like 2002, and it has like 7 seasons and 150 episodes. I haven't seen them all. I don't even know if it would be possible for someone to see all of them. Like, that's almost as many episodes as like Star Trek Deep Space Nine or something. Part of the reason I think that the Outer Limits remake works, whereas all the Twilight Zone remakes just really suck, is because the Outer Limits remake is helmed by Leslie Stevens and Joseph Stefano, who were behind original Outer Limits. Now, the Twilight Zone is Rod Serling's project, so after Rod Serling dies, you're not going to get a good Twilight Zone, because, I mean, it's his thing, you know? So, like, part of the issue is that the new Twilight Zones don't have Rod Serling's voice, like the 80s Twilight Zone, which I might do a list of sometime, of worst episodes, because that's all fucking trash. 80s Twilight Zone, the narrator doesn't even try to sound like Rod Serling, and it's not hard to sound like Rod Serling, or do like a Rod Serling impression.
The year is 1999. Within the box, evidence that some things do not change with the passage of time.
Heck, the pinball promo for the Twilight Zone pinball machine, which is a way better experience than the 80s series, the narrator of that tries to sound like Rod Serling, so I have no idea why the narrator of the 80s Twilight Zone didn't try to sound like Rod Serling.
Submitted for your approval, a machine. Conceived of and born in Chicago by some men with a passion for gadgets.
I just think that, without Rod Serling, like, the Twilight Zone is dead, but Outer Limits, its remake is just fantastic. Now, just like with the Twilight Zone remake, there are some remakes of older episodes that are the classic episodes in new Outer Limits. Like, there's a remake of I, Robot, there's a remake of Nightmare. Those might be good, but none of them are on this list because I'm trying to just praise the Outer Limits for its capability to tell fresh new stories, because it's really good. Now, you might not be that into it if you're not a really hardcore sci-fi fanatic like myself, because some of the concepts that the new Outer Limits explores are like so out there, so like mentally, like, you have to really think about it to fully understand what's going on, because each episode has to tackle like a new subject and a new spin on robots or time travel or whatever, that, like, you probably won't be into it if you're not like hardcore sci-fi. But for those of you who are, welcome. I do more lists of sci-fi. I did a list of Outer Limits, did a list of Twilight Zone. Check them out. They're all good, and I plan on doing more of these. It's always fun to do a list of the best of sci-fi anthology series, because they're just really interesting. And I don't think there is any list of new Outer Limits episodes. There's a couple of the classics, but like, nobody knows about this new series, which is really good. And there are a few things that don't really work with new Outer Limits. Like, for instance, the original Outer Limits intro is iconic, and the new intro doesn't really take advantage of the technology of the 90s, like cable TV and stuff like that, which would be cool to see, because the original Outer Limits intro is designed to look like someone's taking over an old 1960s analog TV set. So it'd be cool to see, like, what it would look like updated if an alien was taking over your 90s, satellite dish TV. But I guess they opted instead for, like, these CGI visuals, which are kind of lame. Like, there's an eye that grows into hands or something, and there's, like, a house that grows roots, and
We will
control all that you see and hear.
It's not abstract. It's not like the old Outer Limits, where pretty much the only definitive image that the intro shows you is like the moon, but the rest is just like static and wobbly lines, and it's very like subtle. But the new Outer Limits goes full on ham, and it's like, let's make use of CGI, which it's not as iconic. That's just kind of a nitpick. The new Control voice is okay. I like the new Control voice, and again, unlike with Twilight Zone, where it has to be Rod Serling's voice, or it's just like not Twilight Zone. The Outer Limits, it's just the Control voice. It's just some random voice of some alien or something, so it doesn't matter. But that's, I think, what mainly prevented New Outer Limits from being remembered fondly by people. That the intro isn't that, attention-grabbing. It doesn't make you think that there's an alien taking over your TV, which is the main appeal of Outer Limits. But the stories are just, like, fantastic. They're written by pros. Like Harlan Ellison, you got like I said, Joseph Stefano, so many of these episodes are just great. On this top 10 list, I really only got episodes from like seasons 1 and 2, because those are the only ones I've really like seen in depth, like seen again and again. And they're probably the best seasons. I haven't seen seasons like 3 through 7, but there's so many, so it's like impossible to choose. So I'm just going with the tried and true classic season 1 and 2s. This series lasted until like 2002, the year I was born. That's crazy to think about, that in the same year I was born, there's an Outer Limits remake airing. Like, just mental. I don't know how more people don't remember this show, because it's just really good. Alright, let's get into it. Top 10 Outer Limits episode, new Outer Limits episodes. Not classic, I already did that, but let's get into the new ones, because I think some of these are just fun.
You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the deepest inner mind to the outer limits.
At number 10, we got the Voyage Home, not to be confused with the really lame Star Trek movie of the same name. This one deals with a ship that's traveling back from Mars, but oh no, there's a crazy alien wreaking havoc aboard. If you like movies where an alien wreaks havoc aboard a ship, like, there's that Life movie that came out a while back, but that one's pretty lame. But this one, I think, does it kind of right. It's got Michael Dorn, Worf. Who doesn't like a good Star Trek cameo in Outer Limits? And I think in a way it makes sense, because like original Outer Limits has a lot of connections with original Star Trek. I talk about that in my classic Outer Limits episode video, but new Outer Limits has a lot of connections with new Star Trek. So I just think that's kind of fun. Fun little bit of trivia there. Also, like Nana Visitor is in one episode. Rene Auberjonois is in one episode. All around the Voyage Home, though, it's got Worf, so who doesn't want to see Worf battle this crazy Martian that's broken out and it's causing havoc? And Will Wheaton's in one episode. It's just wild. Anyway, Voyage Home is really good. And like I said, if you're a fan of that kind of subgenre about, aliens breaking loose aboard ships that are mid-transit and like going crazy, then this is for you. If you like Alien or, that kind of thing. At 9, we have The Conversion. This is kind of less a sci-fi episode and more a fantasy episode, but it stars John Savage, who plays Captain Rudy Ransom in the Star Trek Voyager episode Equinox. Yet another connection between this and Star Trek. That's one of the more memorable episodes of Voyager, because, Captain Ransom's portrayal is just so good. He's such a conflicted character. So here in The Conversion, we see John Savage. We see him as this weird, guy who... Well, there's this guy who, kills 3 people because he's, a real estate executive or something. And he gets away. And then he goes into this restaurant, and John Savage is there. And he kind of teaches him the error of his ways. And what's crazy about this episode is that this murderer, this absolute criminal, gets away in the end, but you don't feel like that's bad, because it seems like he's been completely rehabilitated by this magical guy he meets at the restaurant. It's just like really, it's really morally, it makes you think about like morals and stuff and like the potential of rehabilitation for criminals. I also think it's interesting that this episode deals with like white collar crime, like fraud and stuff, which is something that, like Bernie Madoff easily was as bad a criminal as like anyone else, but we don't tend to think of it like that way. So I think this episode is interesting because it deals with that, and overall just like a really thought-provoking, and I mean it's a happy episode because the ending, even though this murderer like escapes being arrested, you just don't feel bad. You feel like he's completely reformed and like changed, and I don't know how else to say it, how this episode makes you like sympathize with this murderer, this freaking degenerate, but it's wild. It really does. So that's the power of science fiction for you, I guess, and like speculative fiction. Like I said, this one's kind of more fantasy, but kind of sci-fi, because the guy could be an alien, who knows. And number 8, we have the vaccine. I kind of questioned whether to put this on the list or not. I'm putting it on, it's from the later seasons, I think, but the vaccine, during COVID, I saw this episode and I was like, ooh, this is kind of like what's going on now, except in this universe, the World Health Organization actually works. Like, these people actually get a vaccine when they need the vaccine instead of like months down, a year down the road. The government bureaus in charge of this sort of thing are actually operational in this universe. And if that's not fiction, if that's not like sci-fi, I don't know what is. And what's even crazier is that the plague in this is way worse than COVID, but it deals with like these people in a hospital and they're trapped, and then they get a vaccine, but they're not sure if it's safe or not, and like, just a very bleak episode, but a good example of the novel concepts that New Outer Limits plays around with and tries and says, what would work here, and so on and so forth. And I think the New Outer Limits carries the spirit of original Outer Limits so well that if you made some of the New Outer Limits episodes black and white, you'd have a hard time telling them apart. That's just how strong Leslie Stevens and Joseph Stefano's direction on this thing is. It's just like there's almost no change between Old Outer Limits and New Outer Limits. And whereas Old Outer Limits is like really short, and that's a shame because it's so good, New Outer Limits is like really long. Not all the episodes are winners. I put the vaccine on here just because, it's a decent episode. I think it's fun. And, vaccine, pandemic type scenarios, not done much. So credit to Outer Limits where it's due. At 7, we have Mind Over Matter. This is a really interesting episode. It deals with comas. I think comas are fascinating. Neurology and like that. And what happens when someone is like completely out of it. Where does their brain go? Because some people who wake up from comas after like a year have no recollection of the year passing, like the passage of time, but they retain all their memories. So you have to wonder, like, how didn't those memories degrade? Where did those memories go? So this episode posits that, like, when you're in a coma, you enter this kind of subconscious, like, dreamscape. And, well, actually, that's not it. There's a twist. And it's a really brutal twist. It's really, like, a lot of Outer Limits, a lot of the New Outer Limits episodes especially have, like, a sad, I guess a lot of the original classic ones did too, and that's something you barely ever really see in Twilight Zone, like just an ending that completely destroys the morale of the characters, like just completely obliterates their will to live. The Outer Limits is kind of sadistic in that regard, both the old one and the new one, but Mind Over Matter deals with comas, and I just think that's really interesting. The state between life and death, you're being fed through a tube, it's so cool. And that's just another example of the Outer Limits, just going where no other sci-fi show ever went. I've never seen another episode about comas that's done this well in like anything. So kudos to New Outer Limits, freaking knocking it out of the park. At 6, we have From Within. Maybe this shouldn't be mind over matter, but I just like the, Invasion of the Body Snatchers type storyline. You got this small town setting. It's a lot like the slasher subgenre of horror, except, it's a small town that's besieged by aliens instead of a small town that's besieged by a murderer. And I think that's just really interesting. I like that they're worms. Worms are so gross to think about worms and parasites going in you and stuff. When done well, it can really be done well. There are bad examples of it, don't get me wrong, like the frickin' earwig episode of Night Gallery, which I've talked at length about. There's the stupid scene in Wrath of Khan where Chekhov gets the bug put in his ear and he screams and whines, and but there are good examples like the boar worms in Flash Gordon, and there's this. And this is just phenomenal. From Within has Neil Patrick Harris, and he's playing a character who I think is supposed to have some kind of mental thing going on. It's not autism, so I'm not personally offended, but I think Neil Patrick Harris has enough range to pull it off, quite honestly. This is before he came out as gay, if I remember, so it's interesting in that. It's one of his first roles, and he essentially plays like the hero of the town. He proves that, like, he something about his condition, which he has, actually enables him to be immune from these, like, alien parasites that are infesting everyone else. So, just a really good episode, and Neil Patrick, the portrayal is a little cheesy, because obviously Neil Patrick Harris doesn't have whatever he's pretending to have, but, I think he's a decent actor, and, like, the girl who plays his sister is also pretty good. So, From Within, fun episode. Also, it has a happy ending, so, if you're into that. At 5, we have Resurrection, good robot episode. The Outer Limits has always been on the next level with robots, and Resurrection is no exception. This one deals with a futuristic society which is entirely robots. It's really creepy. They all talk in a weird, stilted manner, like, "You haven't seen me in a month of Sundays." It's so creepy. It's like, man, they play robots so good. It's such a convincing performance. It's almost as convincing as, like, Kraftwerk's The Robots, There's, like, these big military robots that are big brutes that try and, they're such a tangible threat. I think The Outer Limits is really good at presenting aliens and robots and stuff that actually feel like they're, like, dangerous, And Resurrection is just really cool. I like the birthing pod or whatever. Just a really cool episode. I don't think I've seen it done anywhere else. The same, like, concept of, like, this robot society which is really boring and devoid of humanity decides to resurrect humanity. Just really interesting stuff. Also, the robot city looks really cool. I like the set. It's really good. And that's Resurrection for you at number 5. At number 4, we have Birthright. Birthright is so good. First off, where to even start? It's in the 90s, but it's already talking about climate change, so it's so ahead of its time. It's the part with the, like, jelly sacks that's so gross and so cool and so just, like, freaky. And the alien stuff. I like that this is about a guy who's out of his depth and dealing with an identity crisis, and he doesn't know who he is or why he has to keep taking this orange stuff into his veins. It's a slow burn. I like that. The truth is gradually revealed. It's not all dumped on you at once. It's like gradual. You gradually learn along with this guy what's going on, and really cool stuff. Great alien invasion story. Birthright is just a really like, again, brutal ending. Absolutely just smacks you down with, like, how absolutely, like, oh gosh, it's such a bad ending. It's so terrible, but I love it. That's what's great about Outer Limits. It's not afraid to just say, look, things don't always go your way. You want to have it your way like Burger King? Nah, the Outer Limits is here to crush your hopes and dreams. It's not happy like Twilight Zone. I don't think there's a single episode of Twilight Zone that's like as sad as some episodes of Outer Limits are. Like, even that episode with like the clock, and Edwin thinks he's gonna die when the clock, he doesn't die, he just lives, and his granddaughter's like, Grandpa, you're alive. Outer Limits doesn't do that. Outer Limits is just like, oh yeah, you're locked in this taxi with this manic, deranged alien, and he's not gonna make it out okay. He's not. At number 3, we have The Second Soul. Out of all the episodes of New Outer Limits, I think this is the one that could be called an instant classic. The scenario it presents is so interesting. It's pretty early on in the series, so, fresh, new ideas. They were really trying new stuff. And the idea of alien, like disembodied aliens that take over dead people just presents so many cool ethical dilemmas to think about. Like, what if, like some alien was just like, I'm going to use this dead body, and the people want to help these aliens because they're like benign. They're not like evil or anything. They're just trying to save their species. But at the same time, you have to desecrate graves. That's such a gross and morally interesting concept, because humans tend to have a weird fascination and connection with graves and the dead and, corpses and stuff, and like, we can't disturb this sacred burial ground. They're still very superstitious about that sort of thing. So it's so interesting to see an episode of The Outer Limits which tackles our stigma around using dead bodies in this way, because on the one hand, if we let these aliens use the dead bodies of our relatives, then, we have to deal with it like our relatives' bodies are being occupied. But on the other hand, if we don't, then this alien species will just die out, and that's not fun. So The Second Soul, just like, what a killer episode. And I feel like if every episode of The Outer Limits was as high concept as The Second Soul, it probably would have gotten a freaking, a ton of awards. But, you can't make 150 episodes of something with them, like, all being good. But what's worth, The Second Soul feels like it could have been an episode of original Outer Limits. That's just how, like, boundary pushing it is. It's great. I can't get enough of it. At number 2, we have possibly the most brutal episode of The Outer Limits, Quality of Mercy. New Outer Limits. I shouldn't have to say that. You know what I'm talking about. Quality of Mercy. It's so bleak. It's so sad. It's so, like, hopeless. But you just can't pull your eyes away. Like a beautiful car crash. You just can't stop watching. As Major John Skokes he just gets pwned royally. And the girl in this is just, like, so good at just, like, I'm not going to spoil the twist, but she's just so really good. And Quality of Mercy. It's the most brutal ending to any Outer Limits episode possibly ever, maybe even with the classic series included, because, like, not only is the entire Earth going to be subjugated and everyone on is going to die, but this guy's also going to die, He's not going to make it out. I think there's a sequel. I think the sequel's the one with Will Wheaton, but if you just take this episode on its own, and not as part of, like, a story arc or anything, that's another thing that New Outer Limits was able to do that original Outer Limits was not able to do. It was able to, like, have crossovers between different characters from previous episodes and stuff like that, and continuations of previous stories, because it was really long and drawn out and you could do that. But I think Quality of Mercy stands on its own. Don't watch the sequel episode, unless you really like Will Wheaton, but, like, Quality of Mercy. It's so brutal, it's so honest about just, like, the brutality of some alien species, and it's really a grueling experience to get through this. If you're into, like, if you like Cube, I think you'd like Quality of Mercy. Or if you like, just like prison movies in general, but this one's an alien prison movie. It's so, the whole time he's trying to break out, trying to be as hopeful as possible, and you can see like that he's trying to be, like present this fake story to this poor girl. He's like, oh dang, she's in here, she's probably like just so depressed because the entire world is being invaded and shit, and I gotta boost her morale, we're not gonna get out of here. So he has to like lie to her about like the state of things, and it's just so sad. You gotta see it to believe it. The twist, you'll never see it coming. I mean, you might see it coming if you pick up on stuff like that, but man, oh man. And the body horror. This episode completely delivers on the prosthetics, the makeup, and everything. So, yeah, it's gross, it's sad, it's really depressing, but it's phenomenal. This is Outer Limits really going at it. At number 2. Finally, number 1. We have, I think, the best episode of New Outer Limits, and this one won an Emmy because the main actress is so, she's so good, she's so compelling to watch, and that is A Stitch in Time. A Stitch in Time is a really interesting time travel concept episode. I love it when new stuff is done with time travel. You do not see much done with time travel, but yeah, essentially there's this lady, she works for the FBI, and she builds this time machine, and with the inside knowledge she has as like an FBI agent or whatever, she's able to go back in time and like kill rapists before they're able to do their crimes. Except like every time she becomes a little bit weaker, and by the end like she's bleeding out of her nose and her face is about to explode and stuff. And over the episode we see the effect that the time travel has on her. I think this episode does it really well in that it explores the effects that like time travel can have on a person. That's never brought up much in time travel stuff. Like in Back to the Future, obviously nobody is like experiencing aneurysms and shit from crashing through the space-time barrier. But A Stitch in Time presents a really dark side of time travel that's like, what if every time you time traveled, you lost a little bit of yourself along the way? Like it had a physical deterioration effect on you. Incredible stuff. And the other lady who plays her coworker is like wondering, what's going on with this weird machine that you keep in the storage room or whatever, what are you using it for? And every time she comes back to the present, we see like another of these criminals' faces like fade out on the bulletin board where they keep, the 10 most wanted or whatever. I just think that's really interesting. Like, what if this vigilante went back to the past to like just try and kill every criminal before they do their crimes, which is just such a weird and fun and interesting concept to think about. And there's a sequel to this one also, I think, but I think it's one of the clip show episodes. But just watch A Stitch in Time, that's all you need. Lead actress in this is absolutely great, and she absolutely deserves her Emmy. This is science fiction on the best possible level. A Stitch in Time. That said, that's my top 10 list of new Outer Limits episodes, the new 90s series. It's really good. I have no idea how more people have not heard of it. I guess it's kind of a cult favorite. I don't know. It's fantastic. I think Outer Limits is a good example of like the renaissance that sci-fi was going through in the 90s. You had the Sci-Fi Channel. The 7th season of Outer Limits is on the Sci-Fi Channel. The rest were on Showtime. But I think the existence of the Sci-Fi Channel was a huge catalyst for people rediscovering the potential of the genre. Because in the 80s, you didn't see nearly as much sci-fi. In the 90s, the Sci-Fi Channel was like MTV, but for, sci-fi instead of music videos. And if you can say that MTV was the definitive channel of the 80s, I think the Sci-Fi Channel was the definitive channel of the 90s, because like there was just so much stuff going on the Sci-Fi Channel. It was, new episodes of great stuff, great shows. A lot of shows that absolutely nobody has heard of, like Nightmare Cafe. I remember seeing a promo for Nightmare Cafe on a VHS tape, and I was like, what is Nightmare Cafe? Nobody remembers it.
What if you could get a second chance?
Am I dead or what?
What would you pay?
For a second chance.
You only get one second chance.
We can help them.
Nightmare Cafe, next Friday on NBC.
I just find that wild. There's shows like Probe and like so much stuff. They pulled the plug. I think that was like a collection of like 4 shows that are even more obscure somehow. The Sci-Fi Channel in the 90s, man, that was where I was at. I wish I was old enough to witness that. Now they're just SYFY instead of sci-fi, and the Sci-Fi Channel's dead at this point. But for what it's worth, really heralded a new age of sci-fi. And while Outer Limits wasn't on Sci-Fi, I think it was destined for greatness. I think the new Outer Limits is like, it's bizarre how few people have heard of this. And when you think of Outer Limits, you only think of the original, but the remake is really good. Now, it could be that because the remake of Twilight Zone is so terrible, people just assume the remake of the Outer Limits would also be bad.
I remember my 5th birthday.
But that's not the case at all. As I said in my Outer Limits video, Outer Limits and Twilight Zone are 2 completely different franchises. They share virtually nothing in common besides, like, some of the same guest stars or occasionally some relationships with writers, but they're 2 separate franchises with 2 different visionaries at the helm. In one corner you have Twilight Zone, helmed by Rod Serling and to a lesser extent Richard Matheson. I think the best episodes of Twilight Zone are Richard Matheson. On the other hand, you have Outer Limits, which is Harlan Ellison and Leslie Stevens and Joseph Stefano. And, to assume that the remake will automatically be bad, that's kind of a bad argument, because remakes can be good. Or I guess it's not a remake, it's a reboot. But there are some remakes of original Outer Limits episodes. I don't know how good they are. There's also clip show episodes in the new Outer Limits, which I think is probably yet another huge flaw with it, is that there's these episodes that just feel like filler. They're just regurgitations of previous episodes, just strung together in a narrative. There's a ton. There's like 5 different clip show episodes. And clip shows are always lame. Next Gen has a clip show episode. So bad. Why, It just feels like it's a cop-out from having to come up with any kind of original story. But when New Outer Limits does come up with, like, an original story, like A Stitch in Time or something, it's great. It's so good. So I think maybe New Outer Limits just has a bad reputation or something. I really don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think or heard about it, because I don't know. There's like nothing about New Outer Limits, and that's crazy for a show that was like on 7 years and 150 episodes. Like, you'd think more people know about, but some of us, nobody does. And I guess maybe it's just a niche kind of sci-fi thing, but everyone likes original Outer Limits, so if you've never seen New Outer Limits, seriously, give it a try. You will be pleasantly surprised. You might be upset that I didn't put Sand Kings on here, pilot episode by George R.R. Martin. I just hate Game of Thrones. I can't stand George R.R. Martin. I think he's stupid, but some people might say, oh, Sand Kings you should have put on here, but nah, I'm not. But yeah, that's my top 10 list of New Outer Limits episodes. Give New Outer Limits a spin. It's really underrated. It's a great show. Great stuff. Anyway, that's going to do it for this exciting top 10 anthology list. I love doing these. I'm thinking about doing one of the Ray Bradbury Theater sometime. So until then, sayonara, suckers.